Chapter 8 of Allan and the Holy Flower. This recording is in the public domain. Allan and the Holy Flower by H. Rider Haggard. Chapter 8 The Magic Mirror. I did not sleep very well that night, for now that the danger was over, I found that the long strain of it had told upon my nerves. Also there were many noises. Thus: the bearers who were shot had been handed over to their companions, who disposed of them in a simple fashion, namely by throwing them into the bush where they attracted the notice of hyenas. Then the 4 wounded men who lay near to me groaned a good deal, or when they were not groaning, uttered loud prayers to their local gods. We had done the best we could for these unlucky fellows. Indeed, that kind-hearted little coward Sammy, who at some time in his career served as a dresser in a hospital, had tended their wounds, none of which were mortal, very well indeed, and from time to time rose to minister to them. But what disturbed me most was the fearful hubbub which came from the camp below. Many of the tropical African tribes are really semi-nocturnal in their habits, I suppose because there the night is cooler than the day, and on any great occasion this tendency asserts itself. Thus every one of these freed slaves seemed to be howling his loudest to an accompaniment of clashing iron pots or stones, which, lacking their native drums, they beat with sticks. Moreover, they had lit large fires, about which they flitted in an ominous and unpleasant fashion, which reminded me of some medieval pictures of hell which I had seen in an old book. At last I could stand it no longer, and kicking Hans, who, curled up like a dog, slept at my feet, asked him what was going on. His answer caused me to regret the question. "Plenty of those slaves cannibal men, Baas. Think they eat the Arabs and like them very much," he said with a yawn, then went to sleep again. I did not continue the conversation. When at length we made a start on the following morning, the sun was high over us. Indeed, there was a great deal to do. The guns and ammunition of the dead Arabs had to be collected. The ivory, of which they carried a good store, must be buried, for to take it with us was impossible, and loads apportioned. To my sorrow we never saw this ivory again. A.Q. Also it was necessary to make litters for the wounded, and to stir up the slaves from their debauch, into the nature of which I made no further inquiries, was no easy task. On mustering them I found that a good number had vanished during the night, where to I do not know. Still a mob of well over 200 people, a considerable portion of whom were women and children, remained, whose one idea seemed to be to accompany us wherever we might wander. So, with this miscellaneous following, at length we started. To describe our adventures during the next month would be too long if not impossible, for to tell the truth, after the lapse of so many years, these have become somewhat entangled in my mind. Our great difficulty was to feed such a multitude, for the store of rice and grain, upon which we were quite unable to keep a strict supervision, they soon devoured. Fortunately the country through which we passed at this time of the year, at the end of the wet season, was full of game, of which, travelling as we did very slowly, we were able to shoot a great deal. But this killing game, delightful as it may be to the sportsman, soon palled on us as a business, to say nothing of the expenditure of ammunition. It meant incessant work. Against this the Zulu hunters soon began to murmur, for, as Stephen and I could rarely leave the camp, the burden of it fell on them. Ultimately I hit upon this scheme. Picking out 30 or 40 of the likeliest men among the slaves, I served out to each of them ammunition and one of the Arab guns, in the use of which we drilled them as best we could. Then I told them that they must provide themselves and their companions with meat. Of course accidents happened. One man was accidentally shot, and 3 others were killed by a cow elephant and a wounded buffalo. But in the end they learned to handle their rifles sufficiently well to supply the camp. Moreover, day by day little parties of the slaves disappeared, I presume to seek their own homes, so that when at last we entered the borders of the Mazitu territory, there were not more than 50 of them left, including 17 of those whom we had taught to shoot. Then it was that our real adventures began. One evening after 3 days' march, through some difficult bush, in which lions carried off a slave woman, killed one of the donkeys, and mauled another so badly that it had to be shot, we found ourselves upon the edge of a great grassy plateau that, according to my aneroid, was 1,640 feet above sea level. "What place is this?" I asked of the two Mazitu guides, those same men whom we had borrowed from Hassan. "The land of our people, Chief," they answered, "which is bordered on one side by the bush and on the other by the great lake where live the Pongo wizards." I looked about me at the bare uplands that already were beginning to turn brown, on which nothing was visible save vast herds of buck such as were common further south. A dreary prospect it was, for a slight rain was falling, accompanied by mist and a cold wind. "I do not see your people or their kraals," I said. "I only see grass and wild game." "Our people will come," they replied rather nervously. "No doubt even now their spies watch us from among the tall grass or out of some hole." "The deuce they do," I said, or something like it, and thought no more of the matter. When one is in conditions in which anything may happen, such as, so far as I am concerned, have prevailed through most of my life, one grows a little careless as to what will happen. For my part I have long been a fatalist to a certain extent. I mean, I believe that the individual, or rather the identity which animates him, came out from the source of all life a long while ago, perhaps hundreds of thousands or millions of years ago, and when his career is finished, perhaps hundreds of thousands or millions of years hence, or perhaps tomorrow, will return perfected, but still as an individual, to dwell in or with that source of life. I believe also that his various existences, here or elsewhere, are foreknown and foreordained, though in a sense he may shape them by the action of his free will, and that nothing which he can do will lengthen or shorten one of them by a single hour. Therefore, so far as I am concerned, I have always acted upon the great injunction of our Master, and taken no thought for the morrow. However, in this instance, as in many others of my experience, the morrow took plenty of thought for itself. Indeed, before the dawn, Hans, who never seemed really to sleep any more than a dog does, woke me up with the ominous information that he heard a sound which he thought was caused by the tramp of hundreds of marching men. "Where?" I asked, after listening without avail. To look was useless, for the night was dark as pitch. He put his ear to the ground and said, "There." I put my ear to the ground, but although my senses are fairly acute, I could hear nothing. Then I sent for the sentries, but these too could hear nothing. After this I gave the business up and went to sleep again. However, as it proved, Hans was quite right. In such matters he generally was right, for his senses were as keen as those of any wild beast. At dawn I was once more awakened, this time by Mavovo, who reported that we were being surrounded by a regiment or regiments. I rose and looked out through the mist. There, sure enough, in dim and solemn outline, though still far off, I perceived rank upon rank of men, armed men, for the light glimmered faintly upon their spears. "What is to be done, Macumazahn?" asked Mavovo. "Have breakfast, I think," I answered. "If we are going to be killed, it may as well be after breakfast as before." And calling the trembling Sammy, I instructed him to make coffee. Also I awoke Stephen and explained the situation to him. "Capital!" he answered. "No doubt these are the Mazitu, and we have found them much more easily than we expected. People generally take such a lot of hunting for in this confounded great country." "That's not such a bad way of looking at things," I answered. "But would you be good enough to go round the camp and make it clear that not on any account is anyone to fire without orders? Stay, collect all the guns from those slaves, for Heaven knows what they will do with them if they are frightened." Stephen nodded and sauntered off with 3 or 4 of the hunters. While he was gone, in consultation with Mavovo, I made certain little arrangements of my own, which need not be detailed. They were designed to enable us to sell our lives as dearly as possible should things come to the worst. One should always try to make an impression upon the enemy in Africa, for the sake of future travellers, if for no other reason. In due course Stephen and the hunters returned with the guns, or most of them, and reported that the slave people were in a great state of terror and showed a disposition to bolt. "Let them bolt," I answered. "They would be of no use to us in a row, and might even complicate matters. Call in the Zulus who are watching at once." He nodded, and a few minutes later I heard, for the mist which hung about the bush to the east of the camp was still too dense to allow of my seeing anything, a clamour of voices, followed by the sound of scuttling feet. The slave people